Hey everyone, this is D, Movieman, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today, I'm coming to you all with my top 7 most disappointing films of 2021. Alright, so I'm going to start with my honorable mention. I have a feeling this is yet another unpopular opinion. So, my honorable mention goes to Cruella, directed by Craig Gillespie. From the beginning, even when this was first announced, I always thought this was a bizarre idea. And Emma Stone as Cruella? And as time went on, I got more excited and I became really interested in seeing this very iconic Disney villain's backstory come to life. That's not what I got. Now, I didn't expect Estella to suddenly become Cruella overnight. This is a slow progression. This is her slowly building and forming into that character and that villain that we know as Cruella de Vil. But as a film, narratively, I got so annoyed with how it was constantly trying to avoid embracing anything that would remotely make her a villain. And then throwing in the whole psycho, with no real insight or no real exploration of that. I was just like, Was the music and the costume design great? Absolutely. But a lot of that also felt like window dressing to gloss over the lack of substance in the story. Hot take! I do not think Emma Stone worked as Cruella. I thought her performance was incredibly hammy, and not in the fun way, but the annoying, trying way too hard way. I do think there are a few moments where she does shine, particularly with the fountain scene towards the end of the film. But all things considered, I absolutely feel that Vanessa Kirby could have taken this role to a whole new level. If it weren't for Emma Thompson as the Baroness, and the music, and the costume design, I can't really say that this would have been worth watching. Alright, at number 7 is House of Gucci, directed by Ridley Scott. While I think it is awesome that Ridley Scott is still out here directing at 84 years old and also dropped not one but 2 films in the same year, House of Gucci was quite the misfire for me. The story that this film is based on is so scandalous and so layered and so intriguing, much like the assassination of Gianni Versace. So there's a whole lot you can do with that story. But what we get here is something that is very monotonous, very sluggish, and tonally very all over the place. And then because we are covering 25 years worth of story, there is obviously not enough time, even with the 2-hour and 40-minute film, to delve into the intricacies and the significant details of that story. Which leaves us with something that feels very rushed, very unresolved, and especially something that feels like it should have been a limited series. Up next at number 6 is Old, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. Listen, I know that M. Night Shyamalan has had a rough road over the years. And let it be said that when the sun shines on M. Night Shyamalan, it shines brightly. But when it rains on M. Night Shyamalan, it pours. And Old is a monsoon. Old is annoying, repetitive, nonsensical, ridiculous, and in the end, very pointless. It takes a very special director to make a cast this talented look like complete amateurs. The dialogue is also quite horrific. The rust, it poisons the blood. I can at least give Old credit for making me feel as if I had aged 10 years after watching it. Old literally made me feel old, which in itself is quite remarkable. And at number 5, we have the Fear Street Trilogy, directed by Lee Janiak. I can be fair and say that perhaps having such a close personal connection with R.L. Stine and with his books, and in this case, the Fear Street book series, I can see how that could have raised my expectations up just a little bit. But I thought that the Fear Street trilogy was such a waste of potential. I think it does get better as we go along, but 1994 is a real bust. The dialogue is whack, the humor falls flat, and the Ghostface inspired killer did nothing for me. I also despise, and I do mean despise, Dina and Sam. I thought they had zero chemistry. I had zero investment in their relationship. And considering the eventual fate of other characters based on their foolishness, it only fueled my desire to see them both die horrible deaths. Plus, I fell asleep on it. If I fall asleep on a film, then it means I enjoyed 1978 a lot more. I think 1666 was probably the best. But all things considered, I have a feeling that even the worst of the Fear Street novels are significantly more interesting than this trilogy. And at number 4, we have Venom, Let There Be Carnage, directed by Andy Serkis. There's really not a whole lot to say here. I knew that when I saw the first Venom, it was not going to be a great film. But in spite of that, I really had a fun time with it. It was one of those so bad it's good type of films. And I thought that Eddie and Venom's dynamic in particular, it was hilarious. So I walked out of that film having had a really fun time. So you would think it would be fairly simple to take that same film and then raise the stakes by throwing in Carnage and just build off of everything that made that first film entertaining, right? Wrong. This was probably the longest 90 minutes of my life, and that is not an understatement. I was shocked by how much this got on my nerves. It felt like I was stuck watching a really obnoxious, annoying children's TV program. Just a bunch of slapstick and over-the-top foolery. When Venom is punching Eddie in his face and trashing the apartment, I was like, oh, what is this? And then the CGI and Carnage and Venom and these fight sequences, I literally felt like I was watching a bunch of tentacle blobs bounce around the screen. And even that, after a certain point, made me dizzy. I think I legit had motion sickness after a while. I was like, okay, can this be over? And on top of that, poor Naomi Harris. I don't know if it was an easy check, but I'm sorry, she was slumming it here. She is way too talented to have been in this film. The fact that I could be this irritated and this bored by a film involving Venom, Carnage, and Shriek.
We are Venom.
No, we are tired. And at number 3, we have F9, directed by Justin Lin. So when it comes to the Fast and Furious franchise, this whole argument about, oh my gosh, why are they still making these films? They should stop. I've never agreed with that. I've always thought, hey, these films aren't hurting anybody. People can watch what they want to watch, and if you don't like it, you just don't have to watch. And I still feel that way. But if ever there were a case to be made about this franchise needing to end, this film would be Exhibit A. I, like many others, never felt like the franchise needed to continue after Paul Walker's passing and with how beautifully we closed out Fast and Furious 7. But I will say that Fate of the Furious ended up being a really fun time. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this can work. But I am not sure what happened between Fate of the Furious and this film. Everything got worse. I mean, everything. Dialogue, CGI, stunts, story, antagonists, the list goes on. I mean, I realized that there was a running joke about this series potentially transitioning into space. But much like the phrase jumping the shark and nuking the fridge became a thing, I think we need to add launching the Pontiac or something similar to that into the category. Because what? I was like, oh, okay. This is officially a parody of the Fast and Furious franchise. Why didn't you say so? It's clear that the goal here was to squeeze every little drop of credibility left from this franchise. And at number 2, we have Mortal Kombat, directed by Simon McCoy. So I don't think anyone can forget the impact of the original Mortal Kombat film in 1995. And if not the film, then you definitely are familiar with the games. It has been 26 years since that film was released. And yet, this film was the final outcome? Tragic. And I, like many other people, watched that opening scene and I was like, yes, 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 this is the Mortal Kombat we have been waiting for. But then, many of us realized that those first few minutes were literally the peak of the entire film. Now, was seeing the characters fun? Yes. Was seeing actual gore within this story and universe fun, given that it is Mortal Kombat? Absolutely. But the vision of this film was so muddled and confusing that I couldn't help but question why it was made in the first place. And let us not forget, Warner Brothers strikes again. There are nearly 77, count them, 77 characters in the Mortal Kombat universe. Yet somehow, there was a need to create an entirely new character for this film. One that is neither compelling nor all that interesting, and whose power is the live action equivalent of the bronze kneecap from the Fairly Odd Parents. There should have been nothing that kept this film from being any less than a flawless victory. Instead, we ended up with a fatality. And finally, my number 1 most disappointing film of 2021, Halloween Kills, directed by David Gordon Green. Once again, there's not a lot to say here. I think the fact that 2018's Halloween and this film was made by the same director is quite shocking and quite perplexing. Because 2018's Halloween, which I thought was really well done, and Halloween Kills, it's like watching X2, X-Men United, and then watching X-Men Origins Wolverine. So you know how when we would play video games when we were younger, let's take Super Mario Brothers for instance, and you'd have a cousin or a younger sibling or somebody that you would have to share the game with and share the controller because sharing is caring. And because they play horribly or they don't fully understand the game, you just have to sit there and watch them die a horrible death again and again and again and again. That was the equivalent of this film. This is yet another film that I watched and I was just like, parody? Parody anybody? But not a good parody. This is not like Scary Movie parody levels. This is like all the horrible spoof parody movies that came after Scary Movie and they were all painfully unfunny and not entertaining. Right on target. Now let's be clear. Nothing will ever top the unmitigated disaster that is Halloween Resurrection. I mean, bottom of the barrel for sure. But you would think with all the highs and lows that we have had in this franchise, and a recent high being the 2018 film, you think we would get something that kept the continuity of that film and felt like it was doing justice to the legacy of Michael Myers and the legacy of the Halloween franchise. But alas, it only served to show that, unlike Michael Myers, this franchise is dying a really slow and agonizing death. And that much like the abundance of brainless characters in this film, perhaps it's time to simply put it out of its misery. And that officially wraps up my most disappointing films of 2021. Surprisingly, it was not a difficult list to come up with, but still, let's see what 2022 has to bring us. You guys feel free to leave your thoughts below. Let me know whether you agreed, whether you disagreed, and of course, what your most disappointing films of 2021 were as well. So, once again, this is D, Movieman, signing off, and I'll see you at the movies.